Members, let's resume. We are now in the third session. Once again, we'd like to welcome the deputations attending the third session of today's hearing. Here, I'd like to remind the deputations and individuals that your remarks will not be covered and protected by Pt3 82 Electoral Powers and Privileges Ordinance, and your written submissions will also not be covered by the Electoral Powers and Privileges Ordinance. I would also like to remind the deputations and individuals that please note that for people in a public gallery in the electoral complex, well, in the guidance notes to those in a public gallery, there are security measures that have been attached to the letter issued to all of you by the Secretariat, and is also tabled before you. So for those in the public gallery, you can also ask the security officers for a copy of that guideline. And I'd also like to remind the deputations and individuals that you will be given 3 minutes each, and after 3 minutes I'll have to stop you. So first, I'd like to invite Mr. Lee Tek-hong to speak. Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'm representing Action O. Well, it's set up last year so that in the tertiary sector we like to promote equality among some homosexuals, and I've also noted this very interesting phenomenon. That is, it's not just that our constitutional reform is lagging behind, our human rights are also lagging behind. We would just ignore international standards, and we would say that well, because of our traditional convention, we would support lagging behind the international standards, and the administration is also doing likewise, and many people would claim themselves to be people with religious beliefs, and they were also born in families of heterosexual marriage, but then it doesn't mean that they can suppress the rights of the minority. That's also against the situation in Hong Kong, whereby the East meets the West. We are a place where the East converges with the West. I think the administration should also consider enacting legislation on gender recognition, and we should not draw the threshold at people who have gone through a full SRS. The administration should comprehensively review the policy before redefining this. But then the current amendment bill would only confine it to people who have completed the SRS, and the special rapporteur on torture has also claimed that if you require people to go through a full SRS before they can change gender, that would also amount to inhumane treatment. And in fact, not everybody will be able to complete that SRS, and therefore Action O is of the view that for people who have not been able to complete the SRS, that's not fair. And in the case of W, yes, we are dealing with heterosexual marriage, and therefore transsexuals are given the right to marry a person of the opposite sex. But then for homosexuals, if they are denied the right to marry somebody of the same sex, then that would also be a deprivation of their right, and therefore we should have a discussion and consultation on this so that we can also safeguard the right of homosexuals to marry. And for sex changing, I think we can also make reference to the GRA of the UK, so that an expert panel can observe the person for 2 years, and if he has this experienced gender for 2 years, then he could apply to change sex. And we could also redefine that in order to safeguard the rights of the transsexuals and transgenders, so that they can integrate into society. And of course, we should also enact legislation on sexual orientation and so on, so that they would not be subject to sexual discrimination in the community. In fact, these are very important to the transsexuals and transgenders. If we do not deal with that, that would only give rise to more legal problems, and also for transgenders, they will not be able to enjoy their freedom in a community. And therefore, without the GR legislation or sexual recognition legislation, we should not draw the line too strictly. Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Reggie Ho. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, officials and members for giving the opportunity for me to speak. Many supporters have said that why is it that not all the transactions will be able to complete the SRS, and they've already talked about the risk involved. So I'm not going to repeat that here. What I'd like to say is that the subject that we're discussing here is human rights, and Pink Alliance as an organization advocating human rights, we also like to say that we're talking about transgenders is about their gender recognition. We're not talking about their sexual orientation. All right, gender identity is your identity, and then for sexual orientation is about choosing your spouse or partner. So we have to be clear about that. But then we are of the view that at present in the community, as some members have also shown, that is with regard to this subject, they have got some misunderstanding or misgiving, or they are actually very confused. They think that this legislation will encourage people to undergo sex reassignment surgery. In fact, that's not true. Well, just now we already had Joanne using her own personal experience and identity to share with us the problems that these people are encountering, and therefore we should not just say that, well, you can change sex casually. In fact, you're just trying to mess up your life. So apparently it's been alleged that they are taking things very casually. In fact, in the UK's GRA, the Gender Recognition Act, in fact, there are many things that need to be done. So it's not just for somebody to casually say that I would like to change sex and then I can do it. So these are the documents that you will have to go through. So just the form will have 17 pages, and you will also have to submit a lot of documentation to show that during the past 2 years you have experienced that gender you'd like to acquire, and then you will have to prove many things before consideration can be given to allow you to change sex. So I don't want people to say that, well, when it comes to gender recognition, it's something that you can do just casually. Well, when it comes to amending the law, in fact, there is absolutely no need for the SRS to be included in the wording of the law, because in the CFA ruling, if you look at the ruling, in fact, it spells out very clearly that if the SRS is a threshold, it's already something done coercively, or you're actually forcing someone to do something. In fact, in the law, it just says that if that person just follows the established mechanism, and in law, if he changes his gender, then he should be allowed to get married in the acquired sex, and therefore there is no need for the law to spell out that clearly. And just now, Mr. Leung Kwok Ping also made a very good point. So when you go out to consult, have you really approached the transgenders? So I hope that in the future, transgenders will be able to play a role in this consultation exercise. Thank you. Next, we have David Cam. David Cam. Thank you, members. Thank you, Chairman. Well, our society, in looking into the submission by the EOC, we have got some interesting findings.
The issue is point 109. It's meaningless for W to marry a woman, and also another focus is that the marriage laws prevent W from getting married. EOC says that a transgender person have numerous cases where there's no need for surgery, and you cannot stop these transgenders from getting married. The EOC will not object to these transgender females from marrying transgender males. Of course, that would include W. The identity is female. There's no problem in getting married. So the EOC's reasoning is that W, marrying a woman, is meaningful under existing laws. W has many opportunities to get married. So it seems to be in opposition to the ruling. So the government doesn't need to make any amendment, but the EOC paper suggests that they need to amend the administrative measures. So it seems that their reasons are different from their conclusion. So that is our view. Chinese tradition we have males and females forming a family unit, and that has been a tradition for thousands of years in Chinese society. The social order is father, son, emperor and subject. So if people reassign their sex, this might lead to unpredictable outcome. So we need long-term studies. There's impact on the two people and their families, the education, society, economics, and so on. So we cannot rashly amend our administrative guidelines or laws. Now, let's take an example. We have $10 here. We also have 10 mosquitoes here. These could be different kinds of mosquitoes. And this 10 mosquitoes is not the same $10. So whether we have surgically reassigned or mentally reassigned. Thank you. Mr. Zhao Wang, regarding MAB 2014, as a Christian, I'd like to express the following views. Now, even for, I understand W's predicament in the Court of Final Appeal ruling. I feel that the ruling should be implemented. Now, Ms. W has completed a full SRS, so the parameters of full SRS allows her to get married under the new gender. So anything exceeding these boundaries, including not receiving the full SRS or just having a partial surgery or just from a psychiatric assessment, that disrespects religious beliefs and it destroys the foundation of society. Now, the Court of Final Appeal ruling feels that the basic law and human rights ensure that W has marriage rights, but if the amendment exceeds the CFA ruling, that would also be a breach of Basic Law Article 32. Basic Law 32 states very clearly that Hong Kong citizens have the right of religious freedom. They can participate in religious activities. So if the MAB is amended, it would exceed the Court of Final Appeal ruling, and the religious bodies have to comply. So those who have not undergone full SRS, if they want to have their marriage conducted in the church, we have to comply. So that is in breach of our religious beliefs and even if they don't get married in church, they have any other church options, but the church doesn't have any choice. The second point I need to highlight is that this also breaches ICCPR Section 2 and 26 regarding religious rights. So the amendment should not just focus on marriage rights and neglect religious rights. So legislators and other bodies, the EOC, Dr. York Chow, feels that the legislation should be expanded. This is very biased, and I am disappointed that there is disrespect for religious rights. Next we have Mr. Fong Ga-lo. I'm speaking on behalf of Social Values Defenses Alliance. This discussion arises from the Court of CFA W case. We should not amend the law because, according to natural law, sex is determined by XY chromosomes, not the mental assessment or additional removal of sexual organs. So when W married a male, it is a same-sex marriage. The UN only recognizes heterosexual marriage. They do not mention transgender marriage. So if the government enacts law, it would lead to a confusion in the marriage institution. Mr. York Chow of the EOC says that those who have not undergone full SRS, or those who even do not need full SRS, as long as they feel they should live as an opposite sex, they should get this opposite gender identity. And even birth certificate can be amended. So we object to that because this will lead to unlimited fear and chaos. For example, if the birth certificate gender can be amended, then transgenders can hide their identity, and if the other party is fooled, this might lead to a breakdown in marriage, domestic violence, and even divorce. They could also use surrogate parenthood and create a lot of confusion. Let's say a female has undergone transgender. Would they be able to inherit the New Territories villagers, indigenous villagers' rights to small housing? Similarly, if a person undergoes counseling, if they feel that their limbs are a hindrance, will we fund them and help them remove their limbs? According to studies, children with disabilities, if with counseling they can be rehabilitated, that is the only way to help people with gender confusion. We should not rely on high risk and irreversible sexual reassignment. We have overseas examples indicating that transgenders might want to convert back to their original sex, and a lot of people cannot adapt and therefore commit suicide. In 2011, there was a study that out of 7,000 transgenders, the suicide rate is 41%. So is sex reassignment really a solution? Thank you, Mr. Fong. Mr. Msiyun, I'm speaking on behalf of Family Value Foundation. First of all, given such a complex and controversial subject, we would like to simplify it. First of all, we respect the CFA in the W case and their ruling, where Ms. W can register her marriage legally in Hong Kong. Similarly, we agree that the government 2014 Marriage Amendment Bill is just to implement the CFA's ruling, where people who have undergone full SRS can register a marriage. As a matter of fact, we fully understand that the pressures transgenders face. As we heard from the previous session, these people have the right to form a family, and based on the above foundation, we agree with the government position. And we hope that this change, to a certain extent, can help transgender receive society's acceptance. At the same time, the fund feels that the amendment can reflect the CFA ruling. So we urge the government to deal with this very carefully. They should set up a working group to study this, because transgender marriage involves very complex issues. They also need to overcome a lot of legal hurdles. So we hope that the government, in handling legal issues, can ensure that the heterosexual family unit can be maintained. And hence, we urge legislators to monitor the government, to study an interdepartmental work group and look into the details, look at the legal consequences, social and cultural consequences. Lastly, many years ago, I had a male friend. He felt that he was a woman. He not only had the psychological thinking, he admired the women's bodies, and he underwent a sex reassignment. So we hope that with medical advances we can reduce the sort of pain so transgenders are able to pursue their happiness. That's why we agree with the amendment. Next, Mr. Fan Chung Fai. If the paper had not put forward any opposition, then we need to look at what we mean by male and female. Do we have any objective standards? Over the years, medical science has shown that genes determine the sex. That is objective. If you look at sexual organs, that is problematic. For example, if a person for some reason doesn't have sexual organs, then what is his sex? We can use DNA. So it indicates that sexual organs are just an outward appearance. We have to look at DNA. So I want to say that people cannot change their sex. It was given by nature. Some things cannot be changed. For example, when a person dies, same as sex, you can't change that. You cannot change outward appearance to change your sex, because the determining genes have not changed. Therefore, the hospital authority proof is problematic. On one hand, the doctors say that sex is determined by genes, and on the other hand, they allow a change of outward appearance and allow for a change in sex even without changing the DNA. That is contradictory. So I think the HA doesn't have that right by saying that by changing outward appearance without changing the gene and say that the sex has changed. If that's the case, then we should amend the administrative guidelines. For people who have undergone SRS, they should not change the gender, because the hospital authority medical certificate cannot determine a person's sex. In the CFAW case, it's because there was a medical certificate saying that she changed from male to female. So we should amend the law, not allow the HA to issue similar certificates. We also need to look at the law, allowing DNA to be the only determinant of sex. And our marriage laws should only allow male heterosexual marriage. That would be the only objective standard. I want to highlight that you can't change. We can tolerate people with different sexual inclination. We can tolerate people who want the opposite sexual organs, but it doesn't mean we can change a confused sex. I urge members to seek legal counsel, and sex should be determined by the DNA. Members and chairman, sex is an important topic. We cannot treat it lightly. The genes should determine our sex. Well, I'd like people in the public gallery to not make any noise or applaud, because it would impede our meeting. Next, we have Ms. Zheng Weiming. I feel that transgenders, even if they have total sexual reassignment, we shouldn't amend the law. I understand people who need to undergo SRS. I feel sorry for them, but you should not just look at your only needs and your rights. Marriage is a union of male and female to build a family. when I enter a marriage, I understand that my obligation with the husband is to build a family, and we also want to procreate legal offspring. The responsibilities are to nurture the children so that they can be socially responsible. As a mother, I see that the father's role, the mother's role, is an integral part of the child's growing up. This is something that other people cannot replace. The child grows up healthily under parental guidance. I object to transgender marriages because they don't have procreation abilities. They would therefore have to adopt children. But the transgenders cannot provide the appropriate male-female parental roles. This will influence the psychological well-being of the children. They don't know who their biological fathers or mothers are. It will lead to a lot of confusion. So just think about orphans. Even orphans want to find their biological parents, so you would understand how they feel. The people with gender confusion need counseling. They need to understand their biological sex. Hong Kong has health inspections for school children where their sight, their hearing is checked. So in this inspection, we should add an extra item that is a sexual inclination assessment, where they can receive counseling at an early age, and they need to understand their sex. So do not threaten us, as we heard from the transgender person just now, the pain they undergo in the surgery. This surgery is not mandatory. It is voluntary. It is conducted legally, done in a hospital. This is the same as a patient receiving surgery, but not all surgery is successful. Nobody will say that it is torturous exercise.
Next, Mr. Choi Chi-sam. Thank you. I am disappointed with the arrangements for the hearing today because many members do not respect those who've come to express their views. You've not, some members have not attended to listen to the views of the public. The so-called consultation is only, paying lip service. Regarding the focus of the amendment, it's about people who've gone through SRS and whether or not they are able to live with a sustained gender status in order to avoid, gender confusion. Now, the SRS is a complex procedure causing serious harm to the person concerned. It is also irreversible, and therefore it's not something that we should encourage lightly. Our society will require stringent evaluation for a person before they go through this irreversible operation. Although we do not fully agree with the choice, and in order to avoid gender confusion, we respect their painful decision. Because a clear sexual identification or status is very important for people and those around them. Some people suggest that Dr. Yao, the chairman of the EOC, claimed that requiring people to go through the entire SRS before they can change their gender status in their ID card is like torture. This is actually putting the cart before the horse. If the operation is a torture, shouldn't they ask for legislation to ban such operation because it's a torture, instead of applying the ruling of CFA and apply them to the transgenders? We object to any proposal to relax the requirement for the SRS. Within the course of a single week, we received more than 35,000 individuals and 130 odd organizations supporting us on the internet. Public opinion is very clear. I hope members will really play your role as a gatekeeper. The present amendment is aimed at avoiding confusion avoiding gender confusion. Since we allow people who have gone through the SRS to change the gender status on the ID card, that change is permanent. Although we do not fully agree with the ruling of the CFA, I don't think we should just make reference to a person's gender as stated on the ID card and birth certificate. Although you may not agree that divorce is a solution to marital problems, but if Mrs. Chen is already divorced from Mr. Chen and is married to Mr. Lee, we cannot insist calling her Mrs. Chen anymore. People object to relaxing the requirement for the SRS, and they propose to amend the marriage ordinance. They say we should not amend the marriage ordinance before proper consultation. We don't understand. We do not think that the CFA should intervene on issues relating to families and so on. We understand the government cannot, disregard the CFA ruling. I think it is more appropriate for us to amend the ordinance requiring SRS before a person can change the gender status. Next, Madam Fong Lai Hong. Well, Chairman, I was born in Hong Kong. I grew up in Hong Kong. I've been abiding the law and living in peace and harmony. People are it's a blessing that we're able to have a normal family life, enjoying our children and so on. We respect the traditional marriage system, and we also believe that the Hong Kong government has provided for this, marriage system that has given us, a good marriage and happy family life, so that. So as a result, the original marriage system in Hong Kong cannot be changed, and there is no need for it to be changed. In the case of W, he's registering to get married with a new gender status. For the genuine marriage system is based on a marriage between a man and a woman, and it's monogamous. And so the W case has, seriously challenged the traditional marriage concept. And I don't think we should allow any further amendments. We all know that all of us are born of our parents, comprising who are comprising a man and a woman. I also understand, and I also believe that all parents, no parents would like the son and daughter to change from a man to a woman or vice versa. If it is because of their own preference that they would like to go through the SRS, have to consider the family members and the parents and the pain that they have to suffer and the pressure that they have to be put under. Even if a person were to go through the SRS, this will only change their external appearances and sex organs. It does not change. It cannot change the DNA or the chromosomes, and the transgenders will not suddenly have the reproductive ability. We all should realize that once the ordinance is amended, there will be disastrous consequences, and it's also irreversible, and everybody will suffer. We are not discriminating against the transgenders or homosexuals, but we certainly cannot accept that because of the personal preferences, they should therefore have a right to destroy the traditional marriage system and hurt our next generation. Thank you, Ms. Fong. Next, we have Mr. Che Kwok Fu. We are a group of parents. We object to any amendment to the law for the transgenders successfully fighting for the right to marry. In the long term, it will have grave impact on the marital system, because gender change directly affects the marriage system. The marriage is the basis of the family. Affecting the marriage affects the children, and the family is the place where children grow up. Some people say that marriage among transgender is a personal choice, but the choice of some people in order that they would get the affirmation from our society. The issue has now been raised to the constitutional level. As a member of the community, while we respect the rule of law, we should respond to the CFA ruling in a rational manner. The traditional monogamous marriage system is based on marriage of man and woman, forming a family, producing the next generation, so that our society can develop. It's compatible with the social ethics. It's also compatible with the age-long, concept of family. It's also the basis of peace in Hong Kong. Any amendment to the marriage ordinance will give rise to further amendments and more judicial reviews, so that the definition of marriage will become blurred, and people may even some people may only discover that the spouse is a transgender after they have been married. Furthermore, these amendments will send out the wrong message, telling the young people who don't have gender transformation is the panacea. As in the case of an Australian who, a 19-year-old person who wanted to change from being a man to a woman, and his parents supported that. After living as a woman for 9 years and even marrying a man, subsequently he became interested in women, and he started to date those women. When he was 30, he decided to revert and change back to become a man, but his body has already been damaged, and this proved that the GIE was wrong earlier. What he needed was counseling rather than the operation. So as a result, he escaped in his capacity as a woman, but nobody tried to find out or tell him that SRS or changing gender status is a solution. He's angry now that he made the wrong decision. He really regretted that decision, and he felt that he was being fooled or cheated by the lies of other people. And this is something which the silent majority in Hong Kong doesn't want to see. Furthermore, I think the laws in other jurisdictions may not always be good. In the States, they are legalizing marijuana. Should we also follow suit? In order that our children grow up in a healthy environment, we strongly oppose the amendment of the marriage ordinance, and we urge the honourable members to come to the right decision. Next, Professor Kwan Kai Man. Thank you, Chairman. I think there are many concepts which we need to clarify today. A lot of reference was made, or some suggestion saying that we do not allow the transgenders to marry. It's a violation of human rights. We must understand the meaning of the marriage system. It is a publicly recognized institution. Speak from the perspective of a person's, lifestyle. I think we have a monogamous system of marriage, but a man can live with two women. There is no law against that. If you have 2 or 3 men, or 2 men and 3 women grouping together as a private right, the society fully respects that. So what have we added to the marriage system? The marriage certificate means that the government, recognizes that union or marriage, and they they enjoy the rights, including rights in terms of taxation, inheritance rights, the right to adopting children, and so on. So public resources are being involved. It represents recognition by other members of the public. If we change the marriage system, many organizations were to make reference of that. For example, the welfare of the spouses. And in terms of education, how do we teach children about marriage and so on, and that will affect the moral education that our children receive. Personal rights and the marriage institution can be very easily confused, and many people believe that I can choose to marry whomever I want. It's my human right. But this is only a Western interpretation of human rights. It's not the universal standard. The universal standard of human rights is not like what some UN officials have explained, or some judges in the West have declared. The international human rights standard means the human rights covenant of the UN, and also the World Human Rights Declaration. Whether it's ICCPR or the UNESCO have not make reference to marriage of transgenders, So marriage is based on one man, one wife system. So some argue that W, after going through the SRS, could be regarded as woman and therefore should be allowed to marry. And that judgment is based on the understanding of the monogamous marriage system. In the ruling, the judges say the people in a similar situation as W can marry. What about for those who have not gone through the SRS? They will leave it open. The court didn't say that they can marry. So to argue that the government's proposed amendment is contrary, is going against the CFA ruling is not accurate. Next, Dr. Hong Kwa Wai, Chairman, as a psychiatrist and speaking from my 30 years experience, and I've also counseled and assisted more than 10 adult transgenders. And I've also met with the parents of many transgender persons, and I fully understand the struggle that they have to go through. Personally, I accept the Marriage Amendment Bill, which proposes that we should only allow persons who've gone through SRS to get married in their reassigned gender status. I strongly oppose to further relaxing the definition of men and women, so that people who've only gone through part of the operation, or people who have not gone through the SRS alone, and to rely just on psychological assessment to obtain a new gender identity. The reason for that is that I think a person's gender status, if we only relied on his subjective preference and totally disregarding his external physiological characteristics, then this would confuse the general public's definition of men and women. It will also cause a lot of adverse impacts. In the case of the states, there are already precedents. For example, the case of Colin Francis and Thomas Beattie, the cases of two transgenders have shown that for some transgenders, if they've not go through the entire SRS and allow the new gender identity, it will cause a lot of uncertainty and confusion. Over the past year, in Argentina and in Colorado, USA, two boys who were only 6 had some problems of gender identification, and as a result they were able to change their gender status in the ID certificate. And this actually ignores the fact that children from the age of 2 to 10 can actually change their sexual identification, gender identification. And the follow-up studies of such children show that about 90% of people who have problems with gender identification, the misconception or the desire for changing the gender status will disappear. So I noticed that the trend now is becoming more lenient in allowing transgenders to marry. I hope we will not allow Hong Kong to really have to have the same kind of chaos and confusion. Mr. Wong Wai Ming. The Family School Pseudo Consent Group objects to the proposed amendments to the marriage law ordinance, and we also object to people who propose that we should lower the threshold. We urge the government to first conduct extensive consultation on this subject. According to the ruling regarding the case of W, the ruling has nothing to do with same-sex marriage, but the bill the government is now putting forward has not considered the married persons who go through a gender reassignment, and thus resulting in same-sex marriage or same-sex parents adopting children, and this is contrary to the ruling of the CFA. Marriage is, a system representing a whole society, recognizing the couple, and if we want to further expand the definition of marriage, then I think we need to have social consensus on that first. Changing the family ordinance represents a major change. We cannot just rely on a single case law, and before we understand the possible consequences, we hastily amend the law is wrong. The definition of gender, I think in doing so, we have to consider the medical, psychological, ethical, moral, religious, and cultural factors and issues. If the question of gender involves the marriage system, we need to be extra careful, because marriage represents social recognition. For example, can a person's gender be changed after going to an operation, and can even marry some? Is that our consensus? Is it possible this would directly, be contrary to human rights and go against the conscience of some persons? Before we have extended discussion and to hastily amend the ordinance, is that appropriate? Recently, some people said that transgenders don't need to go through the SRS to have the gender status change and be allowed to marry. There's a lot of objection to that already. That is, they're worried about the lowering of the threshold in defining the gender. And such discussion means or reflects the fact that there is a lot of division in our society on this subject. To proceed with the legislation will only create more social disharmony. Finally, I'd like to express my expectations of the CFA judges. I hope they will understand the true meaning of marriage, and that they have a more accurate understanding of the moral standard, and respect the independence of the legislature and not repeat the same story again, so that we can have a more living society. Chairman, I strongly object to the 2014 Marriage Amendment Ordinance and any amendments which changes the biological gender of a person. A person is born man or female. This is already determined by the chromosomes. So even if one goes through the SRS, his gender cannot be changed. And added on, sexual organs are only added to the person, and you cannot change the chromosome of the person. Without the help of drugs, the transgender person can only be gender X, is not really a man or a woman. Dr. York Chow of the AOC suggests that we should relax the requirements so that transgenders only have to go through psychological assessment without going to SRS to change the gender and then marry. And this is totally against common sense. The traditional concept of marriage is the basis of our society. To build up a family system based on that represent universal values. If we amend the marriage ordinance, this is the beginning of a nightmare, because young people can easily imitate the trend. The amendment of the law will encourage young people to choose homosexuality, and indirectly this will help to push same-sex marriage. If the marriage ordinance is amended, then these problems, which only of the iceberg, will appear.
For a married couple, if a husband goes through an SRS and becomes a woman, and then what happens to the marriage? Will this still be valid? And how about the children? Do they still have a father? So should there be any distinction between a father and a mother? And if that's recognized, then does that amount to same-sex marriage? Question number 2, for a transsexual, after his marriage, if he just change his genitals, then is his marriage still valid? And how about other legal and social policies, including adoption, inheritance, estate rights, and also sexual crimes and labor rights, and also small house policy and indigenous villages' rights, and so on? Should all those be changed? We believe that the marriage institution is a basic social institution, and therefore any change should be subject to the discussion by the entire community and go through the legislative process, and the court should not replace the community. For the justices or judges of the CFA, they do not have the right to change the marriage institution on behalf of the entire community. So we're just trying to satisfy the hope of the minority at the expense of the majority's right to enjoy happy marriages. And if children are subject to such distorted values, then that would also have far-reaching implications, and therefore please consider very carefully for the well-being of this generation and the next generation, and this bill should not be enacted. Next, Mr. Fong Kin Seng, Chairman, officials and members. With regard to the traditional value, Karl Marx thinks that every day we are reproducing our life, and we do have this mission, and we also have to manufacture other lives, and that's reproduction, and that's the relationship between a husband and wife, and also the relationship between parents and the children. And Freud thinks that the family is the link between an individual and a community. And also Ernest Burgess and Harvey Locke, a U.S. socialist, also thinks that marriage and family is also the lifeline for the entire community, and with such relationship they'll be able to create a common culture. And also a Chinese philosopher, Sun Guan, also says that family is the relationship between parents and children. And Fei Xiaotong also thinks that parents would have to recognize the children. And also, according to the 44th UN Convention, there is a resolution being passed, and family is the cell of the entire community. And in 1994, it's declared that, that's the International Year of the Family, and this year is precisely the 20th anniversary of that International Year of the Family. In the light of this, the CFA made a ruling in last year that transsexuals should be able to register their marriage, and that's against common sense, and it's also a distortion of the long-held family concept. And let me quote what Mr. Justice Patrick Chen said in a ruling. Well, he said that transsexuals' marriage would be fundamentally changing the marriage institution. Well, that's a very important institution in a community, and overseas jurisdictions' practice would be to do that by way of a public consultation in order to find out if there has been a change in the attitude of the community before any change is made to the marriage institution. And Mr. Justice Chen is of the view that at present there are no signs to show that the community has given up on the conventional concept of marriage, and therefore in the circumstances we should not exercise the right of the CFA in interpreting our constitution by changing the law. And if we were to invoke such powers, then it means that we are coming up with a new policy on social issues and policies, and there would be far-reaching implications, and then there must be a public consultation before any change is made. And given the fact that we have a division of power in Hong Kong, we should not subscribe to the right or the power of the CFA. We should immediately suspend the debate on the Marriage Amendment Bill 2014, so that for the heterosexual marriage, which is a social consensus and a cornerstone, we should allow it to continue to benefit the community. Thank you, Mr. Fong. Next, we have Ms. Wong Mei Fong. Thank you, members. I'm representing the Hong Kong Christian Institute. Well, as a Christian group, we believe that the Lord has created different genders, and for our Lord, who is transgender, so the Lord loves everybody. With regard to the ruling on the case of Ms. W, and also in the wake of the CFA ruling, an amendment bill is being moved, and we welcome that, because for heterosexual marriage, it's been in place for several decades. It's not unique to traditional Chinese society. In fact, that's what we have been striving for during the colonial era, for equality between the genders, and therefore we should treat this equally, so that we must understand the needs of people of different backgrounds, including transsexuals, and we should not just think that the conventional practice can be there forever. In Australia, it already issued a passport to a Hong Kong transsexual, and also the CFA also said that we should also make reference to the URA in the UK. We hope that the administration would also introduce this study in this amendment exercise, but then we haven't seen that, and therefore we are disappointed. And also, in accordance with Article 37 of the Basic Law, there should be a review. Just now, I've also heard Ms. Leung Wing Yen say that for many transsexuals, they're suffering from depression, and many of them have actually committed suicide. In fact, towards the end of last year, we also conducted a survey, and we interviewed some 70 plus transsexuals, and some 70% of them were subject to different forms of discrimination, and their human rights were undermined or violated. So without any law to protect equality rights, if we just hastily pass this marriage amendment bill, I'm concerned that this discrimination will worsen, and that would also spark a public outcry in the community. And therefore, without equality in rights, we suggest that this amendment bill be shelved for the time being. In particular, we are concerned about the SRS, because we can see that the requirement is that there are suspicions that there might be discrimination, because for the female to male to female, that only involves the removal of the penis and testes, but then for the female to become a male, that would involve the removal of the uterus and ovaries. So that's a paternal society. So for the requirement for a female to change into a male, that has totally ignored the balance in terms of the hormone needs of a person, and that's also a totally unreasonable requirement. So it's like in Sudan, because of their cultural background, they would also require women to undergo this castration surgery. And we also have to understand that this is a cultural thing, and we still hope that you can make reference to the ruling by the CFA. That is, we will have to enact a gender recognition law. Next, Mr. Ho Wai Yip. Thank you. I'm representing a group of parents. In commenting on this amendment bill, I'd like to express our concerns and make the following comments. Well, for the mainstream opinions amongst us parents, we agree that by marriage, it means heterosexual marriage is a one-man, one-wife institution, so that men and women can form a family. But if a transsexual is given the right to marry, then in the long run, that would deal a blow to the marriage institution. And marriage life is also a very basic constituent of a family. And if that is changed, that would also affect the establishment of a family. And if children grow up in such a situation, then the impact on them would be very serious. And therefore, we should be concerned about this from the social perspective. Well, I'm representing a group of parents. That's why we do have different concerns. And there are things which I'd like to draw the attention of lawmakers to. Well, for a transsexual who has deliberately hidden his sex change in order to go into a marriage relationship, then for the deceived party, will he or she be able to apply to the court to declare the marriage null and void? You will have to consider the consequences. On the other hand, if the community accepts transsexuals and their right to marriage as well as some other rights, then we must have a very clear definition on sex or gender changing. They cannot just casually claim to be transgenders and then have that accepted. I don't know how you feel about it. Or sometimes even if we have expert panels making such decisions, it doesn't mean that the decisions are always right. So in the circumstances, how are we going to protect our future generation? In particular, if there are people with ulterior motives and they're trying to confuse the situation, for example, if they deliberately tell the expert panel that I'd like to become someone from the opposite sex, I'd like to change sex, and if I am able to acquire that gender, then what happens? Thank you, Mr. Ho. Next, Mr. Chen Ping Long. I suggest that the Bills Committee suspend the scrutiny of this bill until such time when the IWG has completed its work and there is a community consensus before we resume the second reading and third reading on the bill, because that would also have far-reaching implications on the social values and so on, and the implications would be a lot more than what the bill says, because the legislation would represent the authority in the community and also the recognition of a certain value, and therefore with the amendment of the law we have to be very careful about it. Well, the law is something that would be recognized by different groups and all quarters of the community. These are the values that we all support, and therefore that should be built upon the consensus amongst the different groups, and there should be public debate and discussions, and a consensus must be fostered. But then the amendment bill has arisen as a result of the ruling by the CFA, and there is no discussion in the community nor any consensus reached. And there are people who are not prepared to accept SRS, and also there are transsexuals who are not able to go through SRS. Would they be covered, and what about other details? And there are also divergent views on these, and also different groups are making different suggestions, and those would also have more controversial issues involving gender recognition. In fact, in the case of W and also this amendment bill, well, these are the minority sexual rights groups, and for people who try to uphold the conventional family value, I think there is a conflict between these groups, and I believe that, and I think that these values also have an impact on a community. So whether or not we can reassign gender, and whether or not marriage should involve a man and a woman, and there are also economic benefits and so on, all these conflicts have been there, and there has been this mistrust amongst the various parties, and therefore by going through this legislation that would only deepen such conflicts, and there would be more confrontations, and that would also result in a rift in society, and that would also that is not going to help reduce the antagonism between these groups. Well, legislation would also have an indicative impact on social values, and therefore that would have far-reaching implications in the community. Before the groups can have an open discussion and reach a consensus, if we just change the law casually, that would only antagonize the parties. And according to the Security Bureau's paper, that is the electoral brief on the paper, without changing the law, it would not affect Ms. W and also people in the same situation. So their rights would not be deprived as a result of not enacting this piece of legislation. That's why I urge the Bills Committee to suspend the scrutiny of this bill, and there should be no second reading or third reading of this bill until such time when the IWG has already completed its work, so that there can be more communication and discussion in the community, so that the amendment to this bill would be based on more consensus. I'd like to call upon the minority sexual groups and also religious groups to have more dialogues. Thank you. You will have to stop here. Next, we have two more deputations. One is Mr. Terence Lee and Ms. Chiang Wai-ping, but then because we have already overrun, we should have ended by 1:15, and therefore I can only exercise my power to extend the meeting until 1:30, and then the two of you will be allowed to continue to speak, and then for the administration's response, I'm afraid we will have to leave that until the next meeting. So for the time that is left, the floor will still be open to members, but then the time will be extremely limited. Yes, Mr. Terence Lee. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, legislators. Before I speak, I'd like to say that both myself and my group respect people with different sexual orientations. We are very concerned about them. In particular, we also talk about those who would like to change their sex. In the course of our discussion today, we've been talking about Ms. W and also the GRA in the UK. In the course of the discussion, we might have noticed the situation in many countries. For example, in Asia, in Thailand, as we all know, were changing sex. Or there is a large population of transsexuals, and up till now, they have not put in place any law to allow transsexual marriage. In fact, they are not in a minority. In fact, there are transsexuals in different quarters of a community. But then you may say that Thailand's culture is very different from that in Hong Kong. How about Singapore and Taiwan, which have similar cultures to Hong Kong, and their cultural system, social system are very similar to that in Hong Kong. So what happens in these two communities? They accept same-sex marriage, but then at the same time, they also require the transsexuals who have to complete a full SRS. Why? Well, I am teaching psychology, and I've also been conducting research in this area for many years. I've also made reference to many cases. Well, for those of you who are in the know of psychology, you would know that in Hong Kong and in the U.S., well, when we diagnose a person, we will have to go we will have to do it in accordance with the diagnostic menu. So that we would look at the psychological value, and we would also look at certain data and so on. Well, for people with gender confusion and so on, we also have this definition of gender dysphoria, and there are two criteria. So it's about children or adult gender dysphoria. So in these cases, for the time being, the psychological assessment criteria are that to what extent would this person have the desire to change his sex identity. So other than this psychological condition, there are no other criteria for the time being. What's most important is that, well, at the same time, while this person is suffering from gender dysphoria, we also have unspecified gender dysphoria. In simple terms, there is no way to tell whether or not they are suffering from this dysphoria. Well, and a simple analysis is that, clinically speaking, well, according to the knowledge that we have in terms of psychology, well, actually, it's very difficult to tell whether or not a person is suffering from gender dysphoria. And according to this DSM, which is commonly used in the US, in Europe, and in Hong Kong, well, the most simple way to go about it is to enable this person to undergo counseling and psychological assessment, and also hormone treatment and so on, and surgical procedure. Well, I am in favor of the original decision by the administration. That is for people who have completed a full SRS, then they will be given the right to marriage. Next, Ms. Chiang Wai-ping. Thank you, Chairman and members. Well, I am strongly against this MAB. The reason why I'm against it, there are several reasons. Number one, when this bill is passed, I think we are sending out a message to the community. That is, we are trying to encourage transsexuals or transgenders or people who have difficulty in recognizing their gender, so that through this SRS they'll be able to have the right to marriage. But then we know that this surgery is highly risky, and nobody can be sure that the surgery will be problem-free. So for various reasons, if the surgery cannot be completed, or if the surgery is not successful, then I'd like to know who should be held responsible. And for the person involved, so how are we going to define his gender? In a community, do we have sufficient knowledge, in particular medical knowledge, psychological knowledge, to provide support to these people who are encountering difficulties? In fact, by enacting this piece of legislation, it's not just going to affect these people who would like to change sex. In fact, in a community, that would also give rise to gender confusion. And then for the physical features of men and female, there would be confusion.
For immature young, during puberty, they might mistake their gender identity and undergo SRS. So I'd like to ask you, do you want our young people to live in such an environment? And some people also talk about human rights, but I'd also want to ask, when we talk about human rights, don't we need to respect each other? Especially when we deal with such a controversial topic. It affects the marriage institution. Have we seriously considered what spirit we're promoting through this legislation? What values are we promoting? Have we considered that what social impact we'll have after this legislation? So I'd like to urge members to think through this very seriously. We cannot rush through this legislation because it would be very decisive to society. We need wide consultation and discussion. We also need to make reference to overseas experience, especially when they have made mistakes. We do not want to repeat their mistakes. Do we have any legislators who wish to follow up? Mr. Leung Kok-hong. 这位 Paul Jie. Then I'll draw the line there. 2 minutes each, Mr. Leung Kok-hong. I'd like to ask the Christians, if I took you to a Muslim country, you're a Christian, and you need to respect our family rights. You cannot believe in Christianity. It would affect Muslims. What feelings would you have? Christians also need to respect other religions, and if they continue to spread Christianity, they would be killed. How would you respond to that? Who are you asking? Who are you targeting your question to? Who would like to respond? As a Christian, I'd like to respond. If we live in Muslim countries, we will respect Muslims by not eating pork. In the Bible, we have a lot of scriptures where we endure oppression. Christ in the four Gospels had already proved this. Even before Christ's arrival, I hope you can. Well, if somebody legislates and says you are not allowed to practice Christianity, not just eating pork, and you choose to believe Christianity, and if it threatens Muslim beliefs, you have to. What would your response be, Mr. Paul Jie? I have to thank the deputations. This is the third round, and the media all have strong views, and I think this highlights the CFA judge ruling was 4 against 4. It highlights that when it's not appropriate for the courts to make amendments, and because of the basic law, they have the last word. So we cannot overturn the CFA ruling. That's a big disappointment. But after hearing from the deputations, I feel that this is a very difficult issue. I had asked everybody previously, rather than rushing through the legislation, some colleagues say that we are forced to because of the CFA ruling, but the CFA had called for a remedial interpretation. So even if we don't legislate, it's not against the Constitution. So I'd like to ask, do you feel that under these circumstances, before we have full knowledge, should we postpone legislation? Should we wait for full consultation or for a more clear mainstream views. Could you raise your hands if you agree with postponing legislation? We're afraid of the term sufficient consultation. Consultation should be the whole society. Would you like to postpone legislation? Well, time's up, and I'm not ready to continue. I have to thank the deputations. In fact, as our colleague said, you have expressed very salient views. We will consider them seriously. We had 3 sessions. This is the 3rd session. We have 64 deputations who have expressed their views. On 29th of April, we will have another 33 people who would like to speak. So on the 29th, we will have another consultation, and we'll ask the officials to respond. So we have to adjourn here. Once again, thank you. Thank the deputations for expressing their views. So we don't have any other business, so we have to adjourn here. Thank you.